I stepped out of my car onto the polished courtyard of my sister's company, the morning sun glinting off the glass facade. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the air, blending with the faint scent of expensive furniture. I paused, taking in the scene. Well-dressed employees hustling between conference rooms, the hum of conversation and the occasional laughter echoing across the open office. Something about the precision and polish of it all made my chest tighten, a mix of pride and unease. I had worked hard to get here, yet the ghosts of past slights lingered. I recalled the countless family gatherings where my achievements were minimized, my ideas overlooked, and my presence dismissed. Today, those memories seemed to breathe in the polished air around me. Navigating the sleek hallway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass doors. Confident posture, suit pressed, hair perfectly in place, but the knot in my stomach reminded me that appearances only went so far. I noticed subtle microaggressions, a raised eyebrow here, a slight smirk there, nods exchanged too quickly. Employees were polite, yet the hierarchy was palpable, unspoken, almost theatrical. Every glance felt weighted, and I felt their curiosity pierce the surface of my composure. I forced a steadying breath, reminding myself why I was here. I was no longer the overlooked sister. I had earned my place, and I intended to remind everyone of that fact. Carefully, deliberately, without losing control. Then it happened. My sister appeared seemingly from nowhere, her gaze locking onto me with that familiar, calculating sharpness. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," she said, her tone dripping with feigned warmth. "Still renting apartments, I see. Some things never change." The words cut deeper than any professional critique could. A crowd of colleagues had turned, their eyes darting between us. I felt the sting of humiliation, a familiar flash from teenage years when her jabs always landed in public, always leaving me to swallow my pride. My heart raced. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I held it back. Silence became my weapon, my shield. My mind raced, cataloging every insult, every implication, every nuance of condescension. I observed her smirk, aware of the subtle performances she enacted daily, and noted the reactions around us. Some eyes filled with awkward sympathy, others with suppressed amusement. Walking through the office, I let my attention drift over the surroundings, observing the choreography of power and hierarchy. Colleagues nodded politely, whispered softly, or hurried past, oblivious or complicit in the unspoken judgments. I recognized patterns, the same ones that had marginalized me over the years. Contributions ignored, credit redirected, moments of brilliance dismissed. My sister's condescending attitude was everywhere, implicit in the gestures, in the sidelong glances, in the quiet acknowledgement of her supremacy. Then I overheard a conversation, not meant for me, yet impossible to ignore. A manager casually remarked, "She'll never measure up to her sister." The words weren't loud, but they struck with precise clarity. Twist S2 crystallized in that moment. The depth of her disdain, the subtle ways she ensured her superiority was always visible, always acknowledged. I retreated to a quiet corner, away from the hum of corporate activity, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. The office felt both vast and suffocating, a paradox of opportunity and oppression. I pulled out my laptop, the weight of my notes and contracts settling on my lap like tools of strategy. I cataloged the insults, the professional slights, the subtle erasures of my contributions. Memories of supportive mentors and allies surfaced, small lights in a long tunnel, a mole of hope guiding me toward clarity. I weighed each slight against my accomplishments, each whispered dismissal against my resilience. There was a pattern here, a roadmap if I chose to follow it. Calculated responses, measured actions, subtle shifts in perception. I didn't need to confront immediately. I didn't need to explode. Patience and precision could dismantle the facade of superiority she wielded so casually. As I traced my fingers over the edge of the contract on my desk, the possibilities unfurled. There was a way to assert my worth without theatrics, to reclaim dignity without losing composure. The glances, the whispered judgments, the small, cutting remarks, they would no longer define me. I envisioned steps, minor yet impactful, each one designed to tip the balance, each one informed by both intelligence and emotional restraint. My mind flicked to symbolic objects, the laptop, the notes, the documents that could shift perception or even power. These were tools, extensions of the careful strategy I would implement. The office, once intimidating, now felt like a chessboard, each piece in motion, each player under scrutiny. I felt resolve settle into my bones, a quiet fire warming the edges of my restraint. My gaze lifted to the window, watching the morning light play across the skyline, and I knew a new phase had begun. I was ready to act, carefully, deliberately, and without hesitation. When the time was right, I moved deliberately through the different departments, letting my steps carry me past rows of gleaming desks, open office spaces, and glass-walled conference rooms. Each interaction, each nod, each whispered comment became data I collected carefully, cataloging the subtle signals of office dynamics and unspoken hierarchies. My sister floated through the spaces like a conductor, her attention seemingly everywhere, her tone polite but sharp, an undercurrent of control threading through each exchange. I watched the way she positioned herself, the half-smiles that carried judgment, the slight pauses that indicated her awareness of her influence. I noted every glance her employees cast toward her, every flicker of discomfort or admiration, mapping the invisible power structure like an analyst piecing together a strategy. Memories surfaced of moments when my own ideas had been claimed by others, when my contributions had been ignored or quietly dismissed. I allowed those recollections to sharpen my focus, reminding me that patience and calculation were now my allies. Passing a cluster of employees, I caught the faintest laughter and the subtle curl of a smile aimed in my direction. One of my sister's remarks about my renting situation had been overheard, and the whispers that followed were quick and quiet, but unmistakable. A minor humiliation, yet public, brushing against the edges of my composure. My heart quickened for a split second before I forced it back under control, committing each detail to memory rather than reacting. There was a rhythm to the mockery, a cadence that suggested it was habitual, rehearsed even. I noted the colleagues who reacted with awkward glances, those who smirked behind half-closed lips, and those who seemed unaffected. Every observation fed into a larger mental blueprint. I didn't need to retaliate immediately. In fact, restraint was power, and the opportunity to respond with precision would be far more satisfying than a hasty outburst. I found myself pausing near a reception area, watching interactions unfold and reflecting on who might be an ally, a neutral party, or someone who could inadvertently bolster my position. Mentors I had once confided in came to mind, their wisdom echoing in my awareness of risks and benefits. I considered colleagues whose support could tip the balance subtly in my favor, those whose testimonies or observations might later prove useful. My attention shifted to a document, partly hidden beneath a stack of papers my sister had left unattended, a contract that could hold leverage if handled strategically. Twist S4 settled quietly in my mind, a potential foothold for the future. I ran through mental scenarios. Approaching directly could provoke defensiveness. Waiting could allow for precision. Each path weighed carefully, the stakes measured in both reputation and outcome. I drew strength from my own record of achievements, reminding myself that competence and experience were not to be underestimated. Seeking a moment of privacy, I stepped into a smaller office tucked off the main corridor. The quiet offered clarity, allowing me to catalog everything I had observed, every slight, every misstep, every overlooked detail. My laptop sat open, notes ready, contracts aligned like pieces on a chessboard. I breathed slowly, acknowledging the emotions simmering beneath. Anger, frustration, the sting of past grievances, but I transformed them into focus, sharpening my intent. Every reaction, every micro-expression, every whispered judgment became part of the strategic map I was forming. Patience was not passive, it was deliberate, a calculated stillness before action. I imagined potential sequences, small nudges, subtle shifts, an accumulation of evidence and influence that would eventually allow me to act decisively. A slight opening presented itself, a minor oversight, a door left ajar in her otherwise meticulous oversight, and my mind fixed upon it. The morning light filtered through the blinds, illuminating the edge of possibility. I felt the balance tipping ever so slightly toward my favor. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and the game had begun. I settled into the quiet corner of the cafeteria, my laptop open but untouched, letting my mind run through every observation I had collected over the morning. The patterns were clear now. The way my sister deflected credit, the subtle dismissal of my ideas, the casual microaggressions that had piled up over the years. I could feel the tension in my chest, but it wasn't anger alone. It was a precise, measured awareness. This was my first real opportunity to test the waters, to plant a small piece of evidence, gauge reactions, and learn the angles I could leverage later. I ran through the scenarios in my head, imagining every possible response, every micro-expression, and the potential allies who might notice, silently nodding in understanding or support. The stakes were more than ego. My reputation, self-respect, and long-term leverage were at play. Each mental simulation reinforced the careful patience I had cultivated. One small move, I decided, could ripple outward, revealing much more than a simple rearrangement. I walked slowly to a shared workspace, the sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting narrow strips across the polished floors. I adjusted a few documents, subtly highlighting reports and projects I had led, projects that had been casually claimed by others in the past. My hands moved deliberately, knowing that my sister's eye for detail would catch every change, even if it was hidden in plain sight. As I watched her approach from across the room, I could see her gaze flicker to the papers, a slight tightening of the jaw, an almost imperceptible lift of an eyebrow. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but anticipation. The employees nearby exchanged small glances, curious, uncertain, unaware, yet somehow sensing the tension. Then it happened. A colleague, in passing, remarked positively on one of the reports I had managed, completely unprompted. My sister's smile faltered, just slightly, a shadow of envy crossing her otherwise composed expression. My heart lifted with satisfaction, tempered by the careful awareness that this was only the first move. The office buzzed around me, oblivious to the silent chess match unfolding in their midst. Returning to my private corner, I let myself analyze the patterns, the micro-reactions, the vulnerabilities that were now visible. Each slip, each small sign of frustration or oversight became a point of leverage, a potential foothold for the maneuvers I was plotting. I reflected on the years of being underestimated, the moments my work had been dismissed or credited elsewhere, and I let those memories harden into resolve. Ethics and professionalism were my boundaries. I would assert influence without stooping to overt conflict, without letting the emotional sting dictate rash moves. Each observation, each quiet analysis, strengthened my confidence. I could see the opportunities forming, subtle yet undeniable, leading toward higher stakes actions that might finally shift the balance. The small moves today would set the stage for tomorrow's revelations, and I knew the value of patience in ensuring their effectiveness. I paused, letting the hum of the office fade into the background, focusing on my own sense of quiet empowerment. My notes, my carefully preserved files, each symbol of preparedness and strategy, became anchors in my mind. I was no longer simply reacting to slights or insults. I was moving with intent, turning every slight, every dismissive glance into calculated knowledge. The tension within me settled into something almost calm, a readiness born of strategy rather than impulse. The first subtle move was complete, and I already glimpsed the consequences unfolding in miniature. My sister's attention divided, small cracks appearing in her otherwise impervious composure. I could feel the anticipation building inside me, the quiet confidence that came from knowing the next step would be even more decisive. The opportunity was there, waiting for the right moment, and I intended to seize it with precision. The morning had settled into a steady rhythm by the time I returned to the office, but the quiet hum of activity carried a new tension, one I could feel as soon as I stepped through the glass doors. I moved deliberately through the hallways, eyes scanning interactions, noting how colleagues subtly shifted when my sister passed, their expressions betraying tiny cracks in her otherwise unflappable persona. Each glance, Each hesitant comment felt like a confirmation that my initial moves were being noticed, and the possibility for leverage was growing. I replayed the morning's subtle shifts in my mind, twist S5 and S6, the rearranged documents, the colleague's unsolicited praise, the slight flicker in her eyes. I positioned myself strategically, joining meetings with careful timing, standing in corners where discussions might naturally pivot my way, planting presence without provoking suspicion. The calculation was precise, a chessboard in motion, each piece moving for maximum effect. And I could sense a small opening forming, a moment that, if handled correctly, could unbalance her just enough to reveal opportunity. By midday, the air in the conference room was charged with unspoken tension. I presented updates on a project, weaving in contributions I had led, careful to phrase them as collaborative, yet ensuring my involvement was visible to all. The reactions were telling. A few colleagues leaned forward, nodding, while others maintained their allegiance to my sister, smiles tight, eyes calculating. She caught every word, her posture stiffening, a subtle attempt at reclaiming dominance. That was the moment. Twist S8. A slight exchange of words, a small verbal correction she offered in front of the team, meant to assert authority, but it only underscored her awareness of my presence. I absorbed the tension, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having nudged her off balance, tempered with the careful anxiety of potential backlash. Every movement, every glance was data, and I cataloged it all internally, the anticipation building like a slow tide, knowing the next phase would require both patience and audacity. Later, I found a moment to retreat to a quiet corner, the muted hum of the office a backdrop to my thoughts. I reflected on her patterns, how she deflected credit, how she managed perception, how inconsistencies in her authority could be traced and used. The ethical line was clear in my mind. I would assert influence without descending into overt confrontation or unprofessionalism. I reviewed the subtle vulnerabilities I had observed, mentally simulating the exploitation of these points in future moves. Each small oversight she had made now appeared as a potential pivot, each slight an entryway for strategic influence. The internal struggle was quiet but potent, balancing pride, patience, and long-term objectives while maintaining composure and intelligence in the face of manipulation. The anticipation of my first significant maneuver was a simmering current, energizing but contained. As the afternoon light softened through the office windows, I allowed myself a moment of quiet confidence. The groundwork had been laid, the observations recorded, the reactions noted, and the subtle shifts in attention had been charted. My files, notes, and symbolic anchors, each one carefully curated, became touchstones of preparation, reminders that power could be exercised in silence and precision. The chessboard was set, the pieces in motion, and I understood that this escalation, measured and strategic, was only the beginning. With every micro-movement calculated and every emotional response accounted for, I felt a sense of empowerment settling into my bones. The office continued its rhythm, oblivious to the quiet currents shifting beneath the surface, while I kept my focus, my patience, and my resolve sharpened, ready for the subtle yet decisive moves to come. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across polished floors and glass partitions. I arrived at the workspace with a renewed sense of focus, determined to assert my presence without overt confrontation. In meetings, I spoke with clarity, weaving my contributions into updates, carefully highlighting the projects I had led while framing them as collective successes. Every word was intentional, a subtle signal that I was no longer content to be overshadowed. Emails and memos I sent reinforced my expertise, phrased to inform and guide, never to antagonize, yet leaving no doubt about my capabilities. I watched my sister closely, noticing a twitch in her jaw, the micro-adjustments in posture, the way she carefully redirected conversations, small tells that hinted at rising frustration. Internally, I cataloged these moments, recognizing them as opportunities for leverage without risking public conflict. My mind replayed years of being sidelined, of having my efforts minimized, and I drew mental boundaries, refusing to allow the familiar suppression to dictate my behavior. That moment in the hallway, where a casual remark met my gaze and lingered in the air just long enough, became my first subtle warning, a demonstration that I was aware, present, and capable. Later, the tension in a team meeting reached a quiet crescendo. A minor manipulation by my sister, an attempt to credit someone else for a joint accomplishment, prompted a response from me I had rehearsed carefully in my mind. I addressed it directly but measuredly, acknowledging the work and redirecting recognition where it was due, using precise, calm language that avoided public escalation. Colleagues noticed, their expressions a mix of admiration and curiosity, while a few remained loyal to her, scanning for the next sign of discord. My heart raced briefly, a flicker of anxiety tempered by the satisfaction of standing my ground. I maintained composure, aware that intelligence and patience were as crucial as timing. The exchange was subtle, yet significant. A quiet shift in the office dynamic, a demonstration that I could assert myself without losing credibility. As the meeting ended, a message arrived, an unexpected observation hinting that my sister might respond more aggressively, underscoring that my strategic patience would be tested. I retreated to a private corner of the office to collect my thoughts, reviewing the morning and afternoon maneuvers. I examined the patterns in her behavior, recognizing the small inconsistencies, the micro-opportunities where influence could be asserted without overt confrontation. Mentally, I rehearsed potential responses, anticipating provocations and planning contingencies. Every slight, every underestimation became data points to shape future actions. I reflected on my emotional response, the blend of nervousness and empowerment, and resolved to channel it strategically rather than react impulsively. This was not just about asserting professional competence, it was a demonstration of resilience, patience, and calculated foresight. Each observation was catalogued, each subtle victory reinforced my quiet confidence, and I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the clarity that came from understanding both the dynamics at play and my own capacity to navigate them. By late afternoon, I felt a calm determination settle over me. The initial warning had been delivered, carefully measured, and my position subtly strengthened. Symbolic anchors from previous interactions, emails, documents, and notes served as reminders of my growing strategic foothold. I could sense that the next phase would require both courage and precision, but for now, consolidating my energy, observing reactions, and planning the calculated escalation was enough. The office continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet, deliberate shift in balance, while I prepared mentally for the decisive moves to come. Standing my ground had not only marked a turning point in perception, but also reaffirmed my own sense of agency. I left the private corner with resolve, ready to navigate whatever came next, confident that my careful preparation and emotional control would serve as my guide. The evening light filtered through the office blinds, casting long shadows across the boardroom where tension hummed just beneath the surface. My sister's subtle attempts to claim credit for my contributions during the high-stakes project presentation had not gone unnoticed. Frustration coiled inside me, a reminder that passive patience was no longer sufficient. I reviewed the emails, notes, and project records I had meticulously collected, evidence of my work and accomplishments carefully documented. Each irregularity, each moment of dismissal, became a tool I could wield without overt confrontation. My mind mapped calculated steps for regaining control, each one deliberate, measured, designed to assert authority while maintaining composure. When the board discussion began, I seized the moment for a subtle counteraction. With calm precision, I presented the contributions I had spearheaded, weaving concrete evidence into my points without directly challenging my sister. Colleagues shifted, some exchanging glances, some nodding in recognition of my thoroughness. I watched my sister's reactions, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw, a fleeting flash of frustration, the subtle effort to regain dominance without drawing attention. The mix of empowerment and anxiety coursed through me, relief that my work was recognized and tension over potential backlash. Every word and gesture was paced to highlight control and to maintain an air of strategic composure. The groundwork was laid for further decisive moves, hints of the leverage I would soon wield more openly. Observing the room, I took note of allies and potential supporters. Some colleagues, quietly attentive, showed respect for my integrity, offering subtle gestures of approval. I cataloged these signs, noting who could be counted on for influence without overt conflict. Each interaction informed my next step against my sister's persistent undermining. My mind replayed earlier minor confrontations, reinforcing the importance of calculated patience and strategic foresight. I understood that influence need not be loud or aggressive. Quiet authority, grounded in observation and timing, would yield stronger results in the long run. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation as colleagues sensed an evolving dynamic, unaware that the balance of subtle power was shifting beneath their eyes. By the time the workday drew to a close, I recognized a small, quiet victory. A nod of acknowledgement from a senior executive, a momentary deference from my sister, subtle, almost imperceptible, signaled that my counterstrike had made an impact without exposing me to unnecessary conflict. Satisfaction mingled with cautious anticipation, reminding me that the journey to reclaim full control required continued vigilance and strategic patience. I collected my notes and reviewed the day's events, each detail reinforcing my understanding of office dynamics, the vulnerabilities in my sister's approach, and my growing capacity to assert influence deliberately. The rooftop view at dusk offered a moment of reflection. The city sprawled below, a reminder that navigating power required both intelligence and timing. The real test, I knew, was only beginning, and the next moves would demand precision, courage, and subtlety. The evening had settled into a muted hum across the office, the city lights outside casting a soft glow through the blinds. I found myself alone in a private meeting room, sifting through files and emails that had been subtly tucked away. My fingers paused over documents that didn't match my expectations. Contracts altered, communications redirected, contributions quietly credited elsewhere. Shock washed over me first, disbelief settling like a weight in my chest. How long had this gone unnoticed? How extensive was the deception? Each revelation built a simmering frustration I had to contain, aware that one wrong reaction could undermine all the careful patience I'd cultivated. I methodically categorized every piece of evidence, creating a mental map of manipulations and omissions, plotting a measured response that would expose the truth without jeopardizing my credibility or career. The scale of her manipulation demanded not rash confrontation, but a calculated, decisive move. I spent the next hour planning, reviewing the subtle signs of her patterns, and considering my options. Allies, discreetly identified during previous interactions, became critical in this stage. I envisioned how to present the evidence, rehearsing phrasing and timing to ensure clarity and impact while maintaining composure. Controlled anger coiled beneath the surface, fueling determination but never spilling into rashness. Every detail mattered. The order of revelations, the placement of documents, the subtle cues that would guide colleagues to recognize the deception. The room was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of papers. Yet within me, a strategy took shape. Expose the hidden agenda without creating unnecessary chaos. Assert authority with intellect and calm resolve. I could see the eventual confrontation in my mind, rehearsing every move and response, preparing for a high-stakes revelation that would demand both courage and precision. When the moment came, I invited my sister to the meeting room under a pretense of reviewing the project's outcomes. Her confident stride faltered slightly as she glanced at the stack of files I had assembled. I began, calmly presenting the evidence piece by piece, articulating facts, documented contributions, and inconsistencies in her communications. Her expression shifted, defensive, eyes narrowing, posture stiffening. She attempted subtle intimidation, a few well-chosen words meant to undermine perception, but I remained steadfast, each sentence carefully measured. Colleagues seated nearby absorbed the unfolding narrative, silent witnesses to a balance of power quietly tipping. Tension crackled in the air, but I felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time, the story was being told on my terms. The evidence spoke louder than words, the calm reasoning I maintained contrasting sharply with her increasingly reactive demeanor. The room held its breath, the weight of revelations settling, anticipation mounting for the larger confrontation that lay ahead. With the immediate confrontation concluded, I allowed a moment of reflection. Strategic foresight dictated leaving minor pieces of evidence to ensure wider recognition later. subtle breadcrumbs for the broader audience, ensuring the revelation resonated beyond the immediate room. A calm determination replaced the earlier shock. Satisfaction tempered by awareness of the battles still ahead settled in my chest. I understood that this was only a step, a calculated victory in an ongoing strategy of influence and accountability. Every misstep I had avoided, every reaction I had measured, reinforced the authority I now quietly commanded. The next stage, public exposure, recognition, and accountability in the boardroom, was looming. With the truth firmly in hand, I felt the steady pulse of resolve, prepared for the calculated escalation that would ensure justice, clarity, and rightful acknowledgement of my contributions. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the boardroom windows, casting long shadows across polished tables and the faces of colleagues who had gathered, sensing something significant was about to unfold. I arranged my notes carefully, reviewing the evidence one last time. Every document, every email, every small discrepancy I had collected over weeks pointed to the truth. My sister's manipulations, the credit she had stolen, the deliberate misdirection. A critical report caught my eye, a contract clearly proving my ownership of an idea she had taken for herself. My heart thudded, a mix of determination and controlled tension coursing through me. I could feel the shift in the air, the quiet anticipation of those around me, and I knew this was the moment to act decisively. As the meeting began, I waited for the perfect opening, a pause when attention was focused, and then I presented the evidence calmly and systematically. My sister's composure faltered almost immediately, her eyes narrowing, lips tightening in a barely concealed attempt at dominance. She tried gaslighting subtly, suggesting I had misinterpreted the data or overstated my role. But I had anticipated this. Allies I had quietly aligned with gave subtle nods, reinforcing the credibility of my assertions without interrupting the flow of my presentation. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent hum of anticipation as each piece of proof landed with clarity. My voice remained steady, measured, and assertive, commanding the room not through volume, but through undeniable truth. The situation escalated when my sister attempted a last-ditch maneuver, producing misleading reports designed to undermine my credibility. I had already considered this, anticipating every possible attempt to regain control. Swiftly, I countered with supporting evidence, exposing the inconsistencies and further highlighting her unethical behavior. Relief washed over me as colleagues' reactions shifted visibly. Admiration, recognition, acknowledgement of my strategic composure, satisfaction tempered with validation coursed through me. The control that had been wrested away was now firmly back in my hands. The room, tense moments ago, now hummed with a quiet respect for the measured authority I displayed, a reminder that intelligence and patience often outweighed aggression. Once the immediate storm settled, I allowed a moment to reflect. The lessons from betrayal, manipulation, and subtle undermining had crystallized into a personal growth I could recognize and respect. I reviewed the policies, considering steps to prevent similar behavior in the future, both for my protection and for the integrity of the company. Calm triumph replaced adrenaline, and a cautious optimism settled in my chest. While challenges would always exist, the boardroom had become a testament to calculated action, measured authority, and the power of patience paired with intellect. With the showdown behind me, the path to final resolution and personal closure was now within sight, and I was ready to face whatever came next with clarity and strength. The evening light filtered softly through my home office window, the city of Houston stretching quietly below. The tension that had defined the past weeks was finally easing. At the company, I could feel the subtle shift. Colleagues had acknowledged the resolution in my favor, the evidence finally settling the question of my rightful contributions. A confirming email from the board served as the final affirmation. My name cleared, my work recognized, and the undermining influence of my sister laid bare. A wave of calm relief washed over me, tempered with the awareness that the relationship with my sister would always carry its complexities. Yet for the first time, I felt an unshakable confidence, knowing I had asserted my worth and maintained integrity without losing composure. In the quiet of my home, I reflected on the personal journey that had led to this point. Conversations with supportive family members allowed old misunderstandings to surface and be addressed, not with recrimination, but with measured honesty. I acknowledged the emotional scars from years of mockery and subtle neglect, yet chose forgiveness. Not to condone past behavior, but to release myself from its grip. In this clarity, I reconnected with my values, affirming that self-worth does not hinge on external validation. Plans for future career growth and personal fulfillment began to take shape in my mind, anchored in a sense of empowerment and self-determination. Boundaries with my sister were established quietly, firmly, preserving dignity while maintaining peace. At work, I turned attention to creating a healthier environment. New policies ensured transparency, clear credit attribution, and mentorship programs to protect colleagues from manipulation. I spoke openly about ethical responsibility, using my experience as a framework to guide others toward fairness and accountability. Pride accompanied this purposeful action, a knowledge that my struggle had not only restored my own position, but could also benefit others navigating similar challenges. The lessons of resilience, intelligence, and standing firm without aggression had crystallized, offering a model for professional and personal conduct. As the evening settled into night, I took a quiet moment to reflect on the arc of this journey. Not all wounds had fully healed, and some tensions would remain, but the clarity of my path forward was undeniable. The early moments of doubt and confrontation now felt like distant echoes, reminders of growth and the power of patience and strategy. I allowed myself a deep breath, embracing a sense of peace and quiet triumph. Ahead lay opportunity, continued growth, and life unburdened by past betrayals. The lessons learned and the boundaries established promised not only personal resolution, but also the strength to navigate whatever came next with intelligence, courage, and unwavering self-respect.